Ladies and gentlemen, we do thank you very much for your attention, and now we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Welcome to our top travel destinations. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan. I have been editor of the weekly travel news column in the Sunday Independent and the Fine Wine and Food Guide, and I am here to use my decades of experience to help you know exactly where to stay, eat, drink, shop, and explore when visiting the world's top travel destinations. So sit back and enjoy the wonders of travel as we take off on our magical journey together.
Okay, so welcome to Kevin's top travel destination. I'm delighted to welcome back Nora Casey, who is a fabulous solo traveler, broadcaster, of course, publisher, well known from Dragon's Den, and most recently she has brought out a most extraordinary quality magazine called Planet Woman Travel. It's both online and print, and I would highly recommend you check that out, particularly if you're a woman traveler. And we are doing a podcast on looking at what it's like to be a solo woman traveler and everything wrapped up around that. But today, Nora's come in to talk to us a little bit about a destination which is very, very unique, and that is Iceland. You're very welcome, Nora.
Thanks very much. Yes, nice and cold up there in Iceland.
It always perplexed me that Greenland should really have been called Iceland, and Iceland should have been called Greenland because it's quite green.
Exactly. Yeah, I can never understand that myself.
It's sort of weird. Is it because it's on the continental shelf where there's the two continents? There's something slightly mad in the air. Why would you recommend people go to Iceland?
Okay, I was inspired. I've been to Iceland a few times, but I heard that New Year's Eve was something else there. And we know that we're not great on New Year's Eve in Ireland, right? I trained as a nurse in Scotland, and I used to come home for Christmas and go back for Hogmanay because that was the crack in Scotland. So you're always struggling on New Year's Eve. What will we do? So I said, I'm going to go to Iceland.
On your own?
No, I went with my son.
Okay.
So we headed off to Iceland and stayed in a hostel at the end of the main street. So
in Reykjavik.
It was only a couple of hours away on Iceland Air. The flight was super quick. You were there in a jiffy. I couldn't believe how close it was, really. The first thing you need to know is it's dark quite a lot of the day. It starts to get light around early afternoon for a couple of hours, but I wouldn't say too bright, like dusky. It was a hostel come kind of single room hotel, very laid back. But outside the window, there was a couple of chairs and a table that were constantly heaped with 2 feet of snow. There was nothing that ever moved that snow from the moment you arrived. But it was snug and warm inside. And the good thing is, if you're a woman, you don't really have to pack very much because there's no dressing up. You just wear 7 layers. And every day you put the layers on. And as you go in steaming to try and eat something somewhere, you take 1 or 2 layers off. And at night time, you put an extra layer on top. There's no dresses, no fancy stuff, no sparkles. Don't worry about anything. Bring your warmest clothes and lots of layers underneath. The thing about Iceland at New Year's Eve is they're fireworks crazy, They love fireworks. Every house buys fireworks. And there's no coordination whatsoever to these fireworks. There's a church in the centre of Reykjavik. Reykjavik is not a big place. A couple of main streets and a harbour and spectacular views over the mountains. So you go up on the highland of this church where everyone goes and you're all standing up there. And this chaos reigns for about 4 hours. Everywhere you look, some house or other is letting off one little stream of fireworks. It could be big swirling stuff. Somebody might have loads of money in the distance, but it's going off for hours. Just sporadically, there's no music. There's absolutely no coordination. Nobody's trying to tell anyone to set them off. Every time you think it's died down, it'll start taking off again. It was the best fun. And it goes on till 4 a.m. You're just literally sitting up on the high ground and freezing cold watching this spectacular performance. But the other thing I always wanted to do was I went snowmobiling. The company was called Mountaineers, and across one of the biggest glaciers in Iceland. And it was the coolest thing I've ever done. I remember myself and Dara high-fiving each other saying, can you believe we're doing this? Now, to get there was not for the faint-hearted. We went in a Jeep with a guy called Gummy, that's his name, and we were mostly in drifts, like almost up to half the feet of this huge big truck with enormous big huge tires, and he kept putting his head out the window to see where he was going because there were only these tiny little guards going up the mountain to show him where he was. And we kept passing these huge big jeeps that were adrift on the side of the road. And, all the time, Derek kept saying, we check our provisions and see if we've got enough to live if we're stranded up here. We were checking to see how much water we had and whether we had the dregs of our breakfast sandwich still in the knapsack. It was treacherous going up, but he seemed to know what he was doing. Like it didn't knock a bother him. Then he lets the air out of the tyres halfway up the mountain so that it can bounce on top of the snow when it's impacted. And then he puts it back in on the way back down. But eventually, after, I'd say 2 or 3 hours of driving in this dreadful blizzard, we arrived at this hut that had all of the gear for us to go snowmobiling. And I think partly the journey getting there was because it was so terrifying. It made it more special. I'll never forget that New Year's Day. Just the fact that we were able to do that,
It sounds like the hero's journey. You're going into a land of challenge and not really knowing, and you're leaving that comfort zone.
I do admit that about halfway up that mountain, I was thinking, what have you done? Like, of all the things, zip lining and throwing myself out of planes and things, this felt like it was the most dangerous. Yet, I knew this company wouldn't be actually doing this unless they knew what they were doing. And I wasn't the only one that was going up to do snowmobiling.
So what was the payoff then? You get to the top, you get on.
The high was just unbelievable. Like, I mean, I can't describe what it's like. It's like, the 15 acres in the Phoenix Park where I grew up, that amount of a glacier with pristine snow, and the light was beautiful because we were on top of a mountain, so it was so much nicer than in Reykjavik. And there was all
kinds of... And the sun, was this the half twilight?
Yes, but much brighter, almost like a really bright dusk, Okay. And we were all traveling across the glacier together, so you could see other people, and then you'd miss them because the sheets of snow would come in and you'd lose them. So there was an element of absolute terror, abject fear, which kept the adrenaline going the whole
And
time.
are you on your own? Are you in charge of your own vehicle?
Yeah.
You're in charge of your own vehicle?
Yeah.
And what's that like?
It's brilliant. Really, the oomph and everything. It was fantastic. And it's only afterwards you kind of think, what happens if there was a crack in the glacier? I don't know what would have happened. But I can only say, I think it's called Langaskull. But it's well known as the biggest glacier. In fact, in the summer months, they carve out bits in the ice and they have a rock concert there. So,
wow.
It's a huge, big glacier. It was amazing. Other memorable things about Iceland, right across from, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, and let me see if I can get the name right, Phallological Museum. There was a very proud sort of sign saying Phallological Museum right across from us. And of course, Dara said, what's that, Mum? And we went over, and it really is what you think it is. Do you know what it is?
It's a penis.
It's a penis.
Yes. Yes, it's quite well known.
It was quite a big one, I mean, I don't mean the museum was quite big. It had a lot of specimens. And I think you realise that human beings aren't necessarily the best endowed on the planet when it comes to the mammal kingdom in particular.
So you've got examples from all the different mammals.
Yeah, and then they have memorabilia made out of the same size, and like umbrellas and lampstands and jugs and cups. And then there was a couple of men who donated theirs, and there was the letters from them describing why they decided to donate them. And my mother, God rest her soul, she passed away a few months ago, but she called in the middle and said, where are you? And at that point I was thinking, get out of here now. Like, nothing more embarrassing than being with your son looking at this stuff, And you're getting strangely interested at the same time, Oh my God, what's that floating in the formaldehyde? Oh, anyway. Yeah, that was this big claim to fame, the museum, Phallological Museum.
Yeah, that sort of sums up for me some of the madness. I went I think it was in 2006, and they had a huge world gastronomic event, and they had chefs from around the world. But they have a very good culinary tradition.
Oh, yeah, I love the food.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, amazing.
And the local drink and the local spirits.
I have a really good friend who lives there. Her name is Halla Thomas-Daughter. Big shout out if she ever listens to your podcast, Kevin. She ran for presidency in Iceland, but she also ran the only bank. It was the only female-run bank and the only bank in Iceland that survived that recession, called Sisters Bank, I think it's called. So we met her for dinner, and she started telling us a bit about local folklore and how Iceland runs. And of course, it's fantastic because it's geothermal heat and everything. The energy costs are really, really low. The crime rate is one of the lowest in the world. But she's called Thomas-Daughter because she's the daughter of Thomas. So she started going down a rabbit hole, very like down in Ireland where my mother comes from in Leitrim. You're named for your father, your grandfather. But in her family, there's 4 of them. So she's Halla Thomas-Daughter, daughter of Thomas, and her husband is Thomas' son, was his surname. And her daughter was called by a different surname because she was the daughter of the husband and herself. And the son was called something different because he had the male form. So in their 4-people family, they had 4 different surnames. And you can never change your surname because they've one book in Iceland that has everybody's names on it. And you have to apply to get your name changed on that book, which is why marriages and things like that are so complicated. And very similar to Ireland, she said that things like elves and little people are really big in Iceland.
The sagas, the Norse, and that whole tradition.
And they all learn it off by
Yes,
heart in the
yes.
original language. So I learned an awful lot from her, but she also introduced us to a lethal drink that had black in the name. Do you know what it's called? Something vicious.
Yes. There's a few of them, and you'd have to say that Icelandicans could drink. I don't know anybody who could drink anybody under the table. Like
It's expensive.
It's expensive, but
Yeah.
because maybe it's 6 months of the year they're in darkness.
Yeah, exactly.
They have a different mindset.
And I think, so the flights are very economical. Like I remember the flights being not that expensive at all. And they have Flyplay as a competitor airline in Iceland. And the hostel was not expensive at all. In fact, I looked it up recently because I was going to go back. And to stay in the Hilton is about the best, like everything is 3 or 4 star there. You're not going to find 5-star hotels. But it was about 210 a night to stay at the height of the season over the New Year's in the best hotel. So it's not expensive accommodation wise. And we didn't pay anything like that to stay in our little tiny hostel come hotel sort of place on the main street. It's so different. And you were talking there about the Europe and the Eurasia plates colliding.
Yes.
So do you remember the unpronounceable volcano in 2010 that went off and
Yes.
grounded? And that was by no means a big volcano. They still have volcanic eruptions all the time. And it's still the only place in the world, not just Sturtsey Island, I think. That was the island that was formed through a volcano lava flow. But all the time it's growing. So we went to Thingvellir National Park. It's really
Yes.
dredging my memory. And we stood with 1 foot in Europe
Yes.
and 1
yeah,
foot in America.
yeah.
It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
There's nowhere like it. And those two clashing together causes all their earthquakes and their volcanic eruptions. And that's why it pays to kind of always look at the volcano sites to see what's happening. You know, because I have friends there, they'd show me 2 parts of the river coming down the side of a volcano that you can swim in and the parts you'd be boiled alive in. You know, I mean, so don't do that, you know. When Richard and I went first many years ago, and there was a place called the Blue Lagoon, now world
Yes.
famous, but it was not famous then. It's actually the effluence
Of an industrial factory.
geothermal factory. So this factory is there. They had a wooden hut and we got into our togs and the snow came down on top of us and we walked across very sharp, brittle pebbles to get into this lake that had the big industrial power plant in front of it spewing, vapors into the sky. And we swam where there was a little bit of a warm eddy and then you'd chase that because suddenly you'd be in a cold one. And it was very slimy and salty and silicone-y. And so you felt great when you came out and they were their own bags or you brought a bag and they'd give you a few of those chips to bring home with you. Now, it's a positive. We booked the VIP experience. So we were in this lovely little protected part of it where you could have a cup of tea and a glass of juice or something. And you slid into the water under the tunnel and came out into the Blue Lagoon to mingle with the rest of the commoners who weren't in the VIP experience. Swam up to a bar where your price included a cocktail. You swam up to the bar and had your cocktail. It was totally different. Like it's completely enveloped in tourism, which is a shame, but also a much better experience than we were there. We froze ourselves because now they obviously control the temperatures. Beautiful the whole time you're there.
Yes,
You can lather mud all over yourself. Like we were literally just swimming in a lake that had bit of hot bits every now and again, but mostly you were freezing cold and your nose and your head was all exposed.
Yes, and there is something quite extraordinary. That sheen,
It's
seems
very
to really
silky.
clean. I have psoriasis and it seems to be very good once you get over the factor in an industrial effluent plant.
Yes.
But it's very benign effluent, apparently. So, well, we're still here. We're both here to show that we survived. And there's something about that floating and then the snow falling on you if it's snowing
magical.
at that time.
Everybody in Reykjavik goes to the baths. They don't go to the Blue Lagoon and pay that price. So they go to the baths, and the baths have dips at various different temperatures, ranging from freezing cold right up to boiling hot. And because we know people there, they would say, what you pay €1 and you go into these fantastic. So we were in the baths all the time. And that was the better experience in terms of feeling the snow coming down on top of you and having to plunge your head down because you actually couldn't breathe with the cold on your face and your temple. And you just had to put your head under the water to get it warm every now and then.
It is actually incredible. And then, of course, you have the geysers.
Oh, the geysers, amazing.
It's a bit like the volcanoes in Lanzarote. It makes you sort of get a sense of how small and insignificant Homo sapiens is. You know,
Oh,
there's this
absolutely.
huge,
Yeah.
you know, and these eruptions, and there's the famous geyser, and I think you only need to visit it for half an hour and just
But
get
you know
to
what?
see it.
The weirdest thing, but firstly, I agree with you. I mean, Iceland is probably the place I felt the power of Mother Nature very strongly, not just because of those earthquakes and spectaculars and lava flows and everything, but because of these vents in the earth that sometimes start to shoot up. So we went and stood at that famous geyser. I'm trying to think of the name of it now.
I know. Yes,
is it
I know
Striker?
it.
Striker?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's Striker.
Yeah.
But so we all stood around, and then when it erupted, it was like as though it was unexpected. We were standing around waiting for it, and then everyone shrieks and roars and takes photos, and then it suddenly stops. And we all stood around for the next one. And we must have stayed for 4 of those little eruptions, dealing with it like as though it was an expected happening. Every time it went over, it was met with sheiks and jumping around and dancing in the water.
Yeah, it's a great geyser.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. But it's interesting. So if you were going to suggest to the listeners who haven't been to Iceland, how long should they go for? And what are we looking at as regards? It's not cheap, from what I remember actually being there.
There's cheap bits. So firstly, you won't ever need a taxi. There's a great bus terminal. And the minute you get into Reykjavik, get to know the bus terminal, because everything goes from the bus terminal, goes through the bus terminal. And sometimes it takes a little longer because it picks up at hotels and hostels. But there's no taxis, no Uber, no nothing. So infrastructure, travel, costs and hotel, all really, really affordable. It's eating out and drinking. That is the big cost.
Yeah.
So none of the experiences I did were overly costly. They were fantastic. They were different. I went out to see the Northern Lights. You have to laugh. My ambition my whole life was to see the Northern Lights. I'm on my 4th trip to Iceland. We went out at 2 a.m. in the morning and trudged around in welly boots in the snow, got the camera out, pointed it at them. It's definitely going to be tonight. We're tracking it all day. Nothing happened. 3 nights in a row, nothing happened. And then 6 months ago, I was out the back in my house in Dublin and looked up at the sky and I saw the Northern Lights. And I've seen them twice since then. So it used to be that the only place you could go was Norway, Finland. And I hope it's not thanks to climate change, but we're seeing more and more of the Northern Lights in Ireland now, which is fantastic. But yeah, I never got to see them in Iceland. That would still be on my bucket list because they're supposed to be spectacular up there, much better than ours.
How many days would you recommend?
I'd say 4 or 5. It's much more interesting than Firstly, there was an awful lot to do, and we did that Golden Circle tour, which takes in the frozen Duffloss, and the spectacular sites in the Golden Circle are really worth doing. That's a whole day. You could leave at 8 in the morning, and you're going to different parts and different national parks.
And the highlights on the Golden Circle for you?
My memory is, do you know the name of the huge big waterfall that freezes in the winter?
Yes.
Yeah, is it Stornar?
Yes.
Stornar Foss. That's it. That's a real blast. I'm just getting that out of my brain now. Stornar Foss, I think it's called. There's one that's Grey Foss, and then Stornar Foss is the one that is frozen. It takes your breath away, and I mean that literally. Like the cold and the icy spray coming off. It's like something you've never seen before. It's quite extraordinary. You go over these little...
Yes, Seldom Fast and Gleisha Phobie.
Yeah, they are.
Murdered
Repeat.
those names.
Repeat after me. It has the geyser that we just talked about, and it takes you to the Teutonic Plates up in Thingvellir Park, National Park. Actually, that's where the geyser is as well. And believe it or not, we went to see the banana. Do you know that it's the biggest producer of bananas in Europe?
No,
yes.
I did not know
Yes,
that.
because when he told us that, and he said, would you like to take a detour off to see it? I said, of course I would. So it's because they developed geothermal hydroponics, and they have this big area where there was very active volcanoes, and the ground is really warm, and so they produce more bananas than anywhere else in Europe.
That is bizarre. That
It's
sort
crazy.
of sums up Iceland completely. And I'd have to say, I can remember visiting some of the little cafes in Reykjavik. I was a big chess fan, so I went and did a little pilgrimage for the Bobby Fischer Spassky match. You can actually go and see Bobby Fischer's grave if you're that way inclined. There is something, I definitely think it would be a great couples trip for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, very easy. I did it with Dara. We sometimes do different daylight hours. I'm an early starter. Dara's quite a late starter. So at least half of that trip I did on my own. But very, very easy very friendly people. Like when you come in, trudging up the main street in Reykjavik, and my mother's from Leitrim and I'm down there all the time, so they won't mind me saying it's like Leitrim with a few more lights. You trudge up that main street and you're frozen stiff, and you come into a bar. The food is not We're talking pizza, burger. We went to a fine dining place with Hala on the last night, which was beautiful. But you're steaming, you're undoing. Everywhere there's chaos because there's muddy boots and there's people taking their 7 layers off and everything. Everyone talks to everybody.
Yes.
Everyone's in good form. Everybody's laughing. Everybody's chatting. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about going there on my own at all.
I think that's a great introduction. Thank you so much, Nora, for your madcap trip. I'd echo that, to Iceland. And it was a pleasure to hear and share that with you.
Thanks. Thanks for asking me.